sure everybody knows who you
Perfect.
are. If you just want to kind of give your little intro, and then I guess the first thing is just kind of tell us what DYAD is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Joey, founder of DYAD. We're a small team building a devolatized bearer asset and sort of a new. I think it's difficult actually at this point to compare it to anything that's really come before. It's kind of a new DeFi primitive, and I'll get into exactly how it works and what the goals are. But fundamentally, there is, I think, the most proven use case in DeFi right now are stablecoins. I mean, that's like being used by actual people, largely in developing countries and largely like Tether on Tron, but it's really being used for non-crypto use cases. That's really the only significant part of DeFi that's achieved that beachhead into sort of like regular people economy type stuff. And then, it's obvious like DeFi itself is built on the back of these tokens that are stripped of volatility. If you don't have any access to something that's non-volatile, you're really limited in terms of what you can do. That said, like 95% of stablecoin liquidity right now are in projects basically, or in tokens that are super exposed to regulatory risk. And that's something that I think has been building for a while, but it's fairly recent, like just looking at the filing on Terra Luna and sort of the language they use around custody and promising yield to sort of naive retail type liquidity. It's very clear that like what people thought of as like this product category, stablecoins, is going to need to. There's going to be pushing back, which I absolutely support. I think it's ridiculous, but at the same time, there's the design of what it is going to have to evolve. So that really brings us to DYAD. So the goal of DYAD is twofold. Number one, it's to be as resilient as possible, and we take some extremely rigorous approaches to that I'll get into. But basically, DYAD is governance free, fully immutable. So there's once we deploy the contracts to mainnet, there's no way to change them. It is non-custodial, so there are vaults, but the protocol itself really has no control over the vaults. They're strictly permission to those who put the liquidity in, basically the DNFT holders. And then we also, this is a recent achievement that is extremely exciting, but it's testing out well so far. We don't use any oracles, so we have endogenous price discovery of all collateral types that are brought into the system, which again, those three things, they sound pretty basic, but there's like pretty much no other DeFi protocols that actually achieve all those three and still have something that's compelling, useful, and can scale. So that's the other side of it. The other side of all this sort of resilience and deep commitment to not just decentralization, but zero governance, immutability, is the efficiency that we can get with this system. So fundamentally, DYAD takes a bunch of different collateral types, and I'll get into how we protect the protocol from kind of like malware ERC20. I mean, an ERC20 is basically like a rootkit for a protocol. So how do we protect the protocol without governance? I'll get into that. But it takes different collateral types. They're going to start as ERC20s, but we're already very interested in how real-world assets can be onboarded into this in a way that doesn't require everybody to KYC. So I'll get into that as well. But it will be able to kind of take in more and more collateral types. There's a process that goes through. Those collateral types are pre-processed, we call it, or basically they're just, their volatility is stripped out in these core protocols. And the core is the first thing that we're deploying. But then, Sharif just joined. Shafu right here is our lead dev. He's currently at Denver. I'm going to be in Denver tomorrow, so he'll get into, I might pass the mic to him at various times. But yeah, so you basically take these collateral types, the cores and the core fork basically just pre-processes them, which means strips them of their volatility, creating basically an over-collateralized token against it. And then those go into something called Afterburner. And that's where it gets really fun, where we add the efficiency, the gamification, and you sort of get this thing that we call DYAD Plus. We might just change the name to DYAD because this is the token, the devolatilized token that is backed by this dynamically shifting based on PvP sort of incentive design basket of collateral that Afterburner is constantly doing rates discovery on. So I'm going to get into how all this works, but fundamentally what you get is this extremely efficient, right? I keep saying efficient because I don't want to use the Y word, talking about like what the ecosystem can deliver. But basically, stablecoins are like a unit economics game. It really, what makes them compelling is how much quality can you deliver? Quality meaning, what are the collateral types? What are your redemption rights as a holder? How over collateralized is it? Because you don't want it too over collateralized, because that could actually lead to peg instability in certain events. Versus how much capital has to be locked into this thing to produce it. So what is the carrying cost of producing the stablecoin? Normally that's just a zero sum trade-off, right? It's like the higher quality it is, meaning the better your redemption rights, the more decentralized the collateral and the better the collateral. So like ETH versus, random shitcoins, and the more of that collateral, more over collateralization basically, the more carrying cost it's going to have. And that just leaves less room for any type of demand driver incentive, any type of creative composition on top of it that can extract value from that. So the whole goal of the DYAD ecosystem is first, this foundation of minimal exposure to smart contract risk, regulatory risk, pretty much the most immutable, simple core on which these sort of efficiency adding PvP gamification and credit formation protocol called Afterburner is built. And that combines that extreme resiliency with tremendous margin on each token produced. So, just kind of in our simulations, we haven't launched Afterburner yet, even on testnet. But some basic like modeling, you can get like a 90-cent margin on a stablecoin pegged to $1. And that's sort of theoretical. I'm going to keep using that term, but as I described earlier, DYAD, given the definition that's kind of forming, DYAD is definitely not a stable coin in the traditional sense because of those things. There's no custody, there's no actual like direct peg mechanism, and that's tied into our price discovery mechanism. There's no oracles and there's no governance. So it is sort of the best way to think about it is a fundamentally new DeFi protocol with precedent in the history of both DeFi and traditional finance, but put together in a way that is fundamentally unique. So I'm looking forward to getting into that.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. And then we'll get into some of the stuff later with some of the things that you mentioned are definitely changes in a few of the things from the first time we talked. And definitely your approach to how you're describing it as well, within the realms of stable coins per se. So a lot to unpack there that I'm looking forward to getting into. So I appreciate the great overview. I think next what would be the best is for you to tell us the mechanics of the protocol, how this is going to work.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's start with what we're deploying first, which we're just calling core. So core only takes ETH as collateral. Each of these cores take one type of collateral, by the way. So core, all it takes ETH as collateral, and it establishes these DNFTs. And DNFTs, D just stands for DYAD. So DYAD NFTs, they're just ERC 721 NFTs that store as on-chain metadata information about like the DNFT's position in terms of its balance, and also its sort of let's call it accomplishments or achievements in each protocol that it composes with. And what's really cool is these DNFTs we've established both like through the DYAD SDK and also just our internal logic. Every DNFT can permission composing protocols that use our SDK and sort of use the DYAD ecosystem to write new metadata to their balance sheet, basically, to append additional data to it. And this is really cool because it allows composing protocols to incentivize behavior from DNFT holders outside of just having to create tokens or kind of set up like a yield farming type incentive setup, which, if you use fungible tokens for that, there's immense sell pressure immediately. When you instead increment stats, basically, if you think of like an RPG, like you do something in a protocol and it increments your like, I don't know, equivalent of a dexterity stat, right? It's not that gamified, or could be, but if you increment with stats that are metadata in an NFT, that will have, because those stats determine a DNFT's performance in a given protocol. Like we're kind of talking with another team who wants to compose about a DEX design where, for example, if DNFT holders, it's not staking because they retain control of the DNFT, permission this composing protocol to write additional metadata to them, it could reward them basically with points on their metadata based on how much like toxic flow they sponge up, so that toxic flow doesn't mess up the normal trading of like, you know, people who just want to get their fill. What that does, and then like depending on who has the most of that, the relative amount of that determines your percentage of trading fees, for example. What that does, though, it imbues these completely non-inflationary limited set of NFTs limited by the core protocol with value, performance value that secondary then gets to price. So it allows protocol builders to create incentives, and I'll get more into the sort of web of how this creates a really strong ecosystem, but it allows this fundamental way of giving NFT holders incentives to do stuff in their composing protocol that they want them to do without having this, you know, kind of having to introduce a shitcoin into the mix. So that's important to keep in mind as I described like core to afterburner, which are the two, like the core protocol, and then afterburner is sort of the summation of a lot of the core forks. Those are the first two that we as the DYAD team are going to launch. And then after that, we're going to keep working on composing protocols, but there'll be other teams that are going to start working on them. Some are already starting to work on composing protocols. So anyway, to get back to core. So core establishes the DNFTs. And there's probably going to be like between 2,000 and 6,000 of these. We're going to have a launch mechanism where that's determined. Each DNFT in the core protocol has the ability to add ETH to the core protocol's collateral vault. They retain total control over that ETH. There's no limitation on them being able to withdraw it at any time. There's no lock-in, anything like that. It is truly non-custodial. Then they can withdraw as much, not withdraw, they can mint as much DYAD as they want from that. So DYAD is the ERC20 produced by this core protocol. Keep in mind, by itself, DYAD is not really that great of a design. It's basically like an over-collateralized, non-custodial stable. It is a precursor for what happens in Afterburner. Think of it as like ETH is the sort of like raw material. Let's talk about this. ETH is like cows, right? Core is like the butcher, and Afterburner is the steakhouse. So that's sort of the progression of like finishedness or completedness at each stage. These tokens produced by the cores are best thought of as a precursor, like sort of like taken the raw material, made it into a form that is a lot more useful to what's going to happen with it. And then the Afterburner is actually what uses that pre-processed material. So get into that. So you can withdraw once you deposit your ETH as a DNFT holder. You can mint you want to. And again, DYAD is that precursor. Now, on your DNFT's balance sheet, it records how much of this DYAD basically have you minted. At any point, and this is where we get our price discovery, and this is where sort of it gets really cool. At any point, anybody, any EOA, externally owned account, they don't have to own a DNFT. They can basically attempt to liquidate any of the DNFTs at any time. What that means is to liquidate a DNFT, you as this EOA have to come with 50% of this DNFT's total collateral. So let's just talk about the ETH version for now, the core. If a DNFT has 1,000 ETH, or 1,000 ETH, that's a big position. Let's say they have 10 ETH, and they've withdrawn, 10,000 DYAD, something like way too much. You, as anybody, could come in, deposit 5 ETH, so half of their collateral, and take all of their withdrawn DYAD. So what that basically does, it sounds simple, but basically what it does is at any point, if any EOA believes that the value of ETH is such that they've withdrawn more DYAD, or they've minted more DYAD than 2x their ETH is worth, that trade makes sense. You will pay 50% of their ETH to get all of their minted DYAD. And so how does this work? Because that minted DYAD could be anywhere. It could be an Afterburner. They might not have custody of it anymore. basically that is why there's that 2x requirement. So we kind of, in a way, enforce like a basic 200% over collateralization limit just to have that margin in place where DNFTs, there's like a real incentive for them to be liquidated. Now, if they withdraw so much, or mint, sorry, I keep saying withdraw, mint so much DYAD that there's no way to collect on that, basically. So imagine an attack where a DNFT holder who's kind of gone rogue attempts to mint 1 trillion DYAD, right? They clearly don't have the collateral for that. But the problem then is an EOA is not going to have an incentive to liquidate them because they'll never be able to actually get what they're owed to get all of that withdrawn DYAD. So this really becomes like what optimistic rollups have needed to solve. This is an optimistic optimistic minting mechanism, let's say. So we have, similar to Arbitrum and Optimism and other kind of more progressive, kind of like newer rollup designs, we have this challenge window, just like rollups do, right? So during the challenge window, that basically is a gap between any DNFT saying, okay, I want to mint all this DYAD, or I want to withdraw all my ETH. During that challenge window, before that's actually finalized, that provides time for any EOA to jump in, basically say, wait a minute, you're doing too much. I'm going to take all of your collateral, basically, for trying an attack like that. That's what the liquidation mechanism allows. So that sort of makes this lane, kind of like with optimistic rollups, for a composing protocol where a third party can basically finance or write an advance on that transaction for a small fee. So, for example, Alice has a great amount of ETH collateral. She wants to mint a reasonable amount of DYAD. Anybody else in that protocol could clearly see, okay, this is a legit transaction. Alice is willing to pay, 3% or whatever, to get her withdrawal immediately, or not withdrawal, to get her minted DYAD immediately. Maybe she wants to bring it into Afterburner and capture some value there. So this composing protocol would allow anybody else, this is kind of a basic P2P mechanism, but it could also be a pool-based mechanism to basically write an advance or like write a bridge loan for the transaction, take that finality risk, which should be small in most cases. If not, it's very obviously going to get liquidated, and capture a little bit of value that way. That's also an opportunity to allow, build that on the SDK and allow DNFTs who decide to sort of finance these bridge loans to earn some kind of a metadata-based achievement based on this. But yeah, that's basically how the core mechanism works. I'm going to pause there because that liquidation / endogenous price discovery mechanism is completely new and something we've been working really hard on. So I want to get into that price discovery, get into the optimistic minting with the challenge window. So yeah, let's pause there before we get into core forks and then Afterburner and then ecosystem.
Okay, yeah. That was going to be, 2 questions, just real quick, since you kind of touched on it, is what types of protocols that have you seen that are trying to compose on top of this so far?
Yeah,
or that are interested in it.
Yeah, for sure. So I mentioned the DEX. There's definitely a lot of thinking right now around sort of how do you separate toxic and soft flow on DEXs. Someone who's really good to follow there is Doug, who's the founder of CrocSwap. He has a lot of good takes on that. And basically, the issue is like sharp takers in DeFi, you can kind of isolate that to really a handful of like wallets that use MEV really heavily. But this causes the presence of this sharp flow causes a lot of inefficiency on all of the major DEXs, basically. It's kind of funny. The reason people always talked about how great the FTX UX was, or like how great a place it was to trade before it imploded, is because Alameda was actually on there just being a super like easy market maker target with like tons of liquidity. And they basically sponged up all of the toxic flow on FTX. So it made kind of cleared the lane for soft flow and normal market makers to just get really tight spreads and get their fills right away. Obviously, it was built on complete, it's total financial terrorism. But that said, there is an interesting opportunity with the DEX that incentivizes DNFT holders to sort of play that Alameda role, right? To be a super soft sponge for toxic flow. So it goes there like a honeypot for sharp takers, basically, on that DEX. And then get a similar, UX where the spreads are tighter and normal market makers can make more money, and normal, soft flow, uninformed flow gets to get their executions in a great way. So that's one idea. Another idea is true uncollateralized lending, which, the only way to do that is it's kind of like the collateral issue, thinking about endogenous versus exogenous collateral, where if you collateralize some kind of bearer asset with endogenous collateral, so Terra and Luna are the most famous examples of this, you get the death spiral because the collateral doesn't have any, I'm not even going to say value, it has no meaning outside of the protocol that depends on, the any sort of meaning that collateral has depends on the smooth sailing of the protocol that it, or the token that it backs. Obviously, that's super reflexive. If something goes wrong on one side, it's going to go super wrong on the other side, and you get this horrible oscillatory death spiral. Similarly, that's kind of bedeviled like uncollateralized lending in DeFi, right? It's like if you have a lending protocol and you make some identity NFT or whatever, and then you write a credit score to the NFT, well, why wouldn't you just take out as big a loan as you can and then dump that NFT and like make a new one? The NFT and the credit score is endogenous. That the meaning of that is endogenous to the lending protocol. So the only way to really do it, other than just to like basically KYC everybody and bring like FICO scores on chain, which nobody wants, is to create NFTs, identity NFTs, and they don't have to be soul bound. I think actually making them tradable is better. Make NFTs that have value and have an origin outside of the lending protocol. That the lending protocol has to be just one protocol within an ecosystem in which these NFTs are the key and are the nodes of value, accrual, and identity. And that's what we're building with DYAD, right? So these NFTs, which have their origin in the core ETH protocol, they will have secondary market value outside of this lending protocol. What that does is if you take out a loan and all the lending protocol can do is write nasty metadata to your DNFT. It can't take the DNFT. It can't take any collateral because then it would not be uncollateralized. But if it writes this nastygram to your DNFT's metadata saying this DNFT is a deadbeat, don't give them any credit, that will destroy a lot of secondary market value. And that is ultimately what a credit score is. That's what a credit rating is. It is collateralized with your reputation, with your ability to access credit in the future. So we can literally reproduce that exact same incentive structure on chain by establishing NFT primitives that have a lot of value and a lot of meaning outside of the lending protocol. That the lending protocol then has the option to greatly destroy that value that is external to itself. Because imagine a DNFT has like great stats, super valuable, and like a bunch of other protocols. The disincentive to destroy that secondary market value by running off on a loan in a lending protocol is going to be super high. And that's really the only way you can achieve that without going the KYC route. So those are two examples of protocols sort of really like DeFi fundamentals, right? Like almost commodified places in DeFi right now. I guess other than uncollateralized lending, nobody's really solved that. But definitely DEXs, there's innovation there, but it's pretty commodified at this point. I look really closely at Rippling, which is not crypto, obviously. It's a Salesforce for like inside companies, but they have a really cool effect where because of their ecosystem, they can go into completely commodified like B2B SaaS stuff, like things that you would never want to go into now. You just totally tapped out areas. I don't know, like payroll, automate, just like things that like people were working on like 15 years ago, 10 years ago. They can go into those spaces and make products that don't act like commodities because the network effects from all of this ecosystem that they have allows them to make those products so much more valuable than companies that are just building that product. And that's actually like, I think, and this is stepping back for a second, I think that the current like battle or battles leading up to a war in DeFi is going to be between big ecosystems basically trying to become the rails for B2B and B2C, essentially fintechs, I think. I think it's going to take a long time for institutionals to really come back and for like DeFi to be servicing like sovereign debt needs and things like this. I mean, I think that can happen in parallel for sure. That's a little bit outside of our team's area of competence, and I think that really rewards experience in those areas. So that's definitely something that we're interested in. But I think that like what we DYAD ecosystem that doesn't even exist yet are competing against with like the Aave ecosystem, the Compound ecosystem, Curve ecosystem, because these are all now trying to become ecosystems because they realize the contest, like I said, or the battle, the war, is which DeFi ecosystem is going to be the rails that essentially execute transactions or trades or requests or whatever from the real economy. And that's how DeFi starts really taking over traditional finance. It needs to understand that at the end of the day, even the most built out DeFi ecosystem is Rails. And Rails and infra needs to just get more efficient and more robust simultaneously. So that's how we approach sort of our goal. Like we want to be, DYAD ecosystem wants to be the layer on which these companies that interface with the real economy want to build because we're more robust, we completely minimize platform risk with zero governance, and we are far more efficient because of just the incentive structure that we've designed. So that's sort of how I position all this in a larger context. But yeah, let's get back to your questions.
Yeah, I mean, then with what you said right there, that also with your infrastructure, that gives them a major ability to kind of control their own position there as well, which I think is very enticing. You know what I mean? As we'll get into kind of the gamification of the DNFTs, right, to come in and build on top of this platform, they have a much larger say, or they have the say in how they dictate the way their money moves around within the background of their DNFT.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really like the way that the ecosystem ultimately is incentivized is, like I said before, the secondary market for DNFTs plays an important role in sort of discovering the value of rank and achievements in different protocols. What that really means, though, for builders and for the ecosystem and how the ecosystem is incentivized to grow, builders then compete to create protocols whose metadata secondary will really pay a lot for. That's ultimately what the contest is between protocol builders. It's not trying to like game an emissions curve. It's not trying to, boost their TVL because some snapshot is coming up for some grants or whatever. It's really the way that you are successful is you create a protocol that has some kind of a stat or some kind of an achievement or maybe multiple achievements, and DNFTs really get a lot of value out of that. DNFT holders get a lot of value. They are either able to profit or it's engaging or something is good about it. That then will be highly prized by the secondary market because that protocol is relevant. What's really cool is other protocols then can decide, okay, in our protocol, the performance in this other protocol that's super successful and secondary is paying a lot of money for rank in that protocol, we're going to weigh a DNFT's rank in that protocol as like 50% or 25% of its performance in our new protocol. So that immediately starts to entice the top DNFTs from another successful protocol, or if it could be from Afterburner, it could be from whatever, to come to your new protocol, give it a try, and bring some liquidity there. This then forms like kind of like academic publishing, this citation system, right? Where it's like the protocols in the ecosystem that have the most other protocols that count a DNFT's rank in that protocol towards the performance in the new protocol or in the other protocol, those are really like the blue chip protocols in our ecosystem. And that secondary will pay a lot for rank there, and there will be a lot of competition to to basically get rank there and to move past others because secondary is paying for it. And that brings a lot of liquidity and a lot of activity to those protocols. So it's a way of incentivizing like protocols that matter basically or add value, because there's no emission curve to game. There's no like TVL based anything. It's strictly what is secondary, which is traders at the end of the day. They want to make money on secondary. What is secondary saying is valuable in the ecosystem? So that's kind of to give a sense of that, like the role secondary plays and what the ecosystem incentives are. But yeah, DNFT holders at the end of the day, the protocols need to make things that DNFT holders find valuable. And that's always going to be the driving incentive.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. All right, so cool. So let's kind of move on. And I know you got some more stuff you want to talk about. So if you want to launch into kind of the rest of it, how it builds up to Afterburner, and go through all that.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so we stopped at the ETH core. Part of our SDK is what we're calling a core factory. You can guess that basically allows you to replicate the code of the core with some changes. So number one, ETH is not an ERC20. The fork allows a single ERC20 to be the collateral. Number two, the forks don't create new DNFTs. The forks are for the existing DNFTs, of which there'll never be more, from the core protocol to use. So let's imagine somebody wants to bring Lido or the Yearn, like LSD of LSDs, ETH, I think people are calling it. I'm pretty excited about that. So let's just say let's say I want to make a fork of core that uses Yearn's ETH instead of just raw ETH. So I go to the core factory, I pay a little gas to deploy this new contract, I input the parameters, I want to say, okay, this is the token, there's the token address. This is the pretty much the only other thing you can set is what's the default over collateralization minimum. And setting the over collateralization minimum, again, none of these are using oracles, which is also cool because you're not limited to collateral types that already have oracles. But what the over collateralization limit essentially is what percentage of any given DNFT's collateral do you as a liquidator need to pay in order to get all of their withdrawn DYAD or minted DYAD. So if it's like a more volatile token, you could set that to like you only have to pay a third. If it's super volatile, you could say like a quarter. If it's something like, I mean, I can imagine somebody doing this with USDC, right? Like doing a fork around USDC, you could basically set that 1-to-1 if you wanted to. But why would you do a stabilization thing around USDC? Well, the reason is it has to go through this code in order to get into Afterburner. And that's really what this comes down to. So in order for you can permissionlessly create these core forks, right? There's no governance here at any point. I can make a Joey coin where only I hold it and make a fork around it. And without anything else, I could then get that into Afterburner and cause a lot of havoc. So how do we determine which core's DYAD flavors? And we call them DYAD flavors. This is like the precursor token that is produced by each core. It's a single collateral, over collateralized token that really the only consumption of this is going to be Afterburner, but it just makes it more composable to do it this way. So how does Afterburner gate which of these precursor tokens, these core fork DYADs, basically DYAD flavors, are allowed in as collateral? Okay, so in order for a core fork's DYAD token to be admitted into Afterburner, we have to see that at least 50% of all DNFTs, all DNFT holding wallets basically, have had this token in their wallet for at least 3,000 blocks, which is a little less than a month. And the size at which they have it only counts if it's within a standard deviation of the average. So this does a couple of things. This is as close as we get to governance, by the way. This basically allows a vote, more or less, by holding the underlying token that this new fork is forked around in your wallet as a DNFT holder for the specified amount of time in the specified size. And this is to prevent, and this is a pretty high bar to cross, by the way. Like DNFT holders could be DAOs, they could be funds, they could be bots. Like you shouldn't assume there's like a human at the other end of every DNFT. It's not like a forum. This isn't MakerDAO. The DNFTs need to just give their stamp of approval, basically, by doing exactly that, by holding the token for at least essentially 30 days in a given size, or at least size minimum. You could hold it more if you wanted to. And once Afterburner checks that, which is very easy to check on chain, it will allow the new token to comprise part of its collateral. So that's essentially how we gate this. We're actively working on like agent-based threat simulations to see how this could be gamed, but it would essentially require a 51% attack where somebody takes ownership or control of 50% of DNFTs and they're able to maintain that control for at least 30 days. Which, if your goal is to attack the protocol or short DYAD or whatever, that's going to be there's no way you will make a good that will not be profitable, because once DYAD is at the size it's worth attacking for that, the DNFTs will have a secondary market value that you will destroy by trying to do this. And it would be very expensive to buy those. So that's essentially the way to think about this. That there's a sort of governance without governance mechanism that gates new DYAD forks tokens coming into Afterburner. So this gets us right to, okay, what is Afterburner? So Afterburner takes all of these DYAD flavors, the ETH one, the raw ETH core, the Lido one, you could fork one around, I don't know, MKR, one around whatever, any ERC20. Or you could go really crazy and fork it around like a weird basket of like Goldfinch loans or whatever. And eventually, and I'll get into the KYC enclave ideas, you could fork it around real world KYC type stuff that people bring on chain, which is really important for DYAD's future, because even if it's collateral as the basket of different cryptos, they're so correlated with each other and just correlated with risk assets, period, that for this to really achieve its goal, you have to have non-correlated stuff as collateral. So let's assume these are the sort of pre-processed ERC20 DYAD flavors. DNFT holders give their assent to the Afterburner protocol. They say, okay, I want to be part of Afterburner. That's just a message that they sign. Then Afterburner adds a bunch of new metadata, not a bunch, some new metadata to the balance sheets of these DNFTs. It basically establishes a new field in the NFT's metadata and has a couple of things. So Afterburner, this is where we add the gamification via XP, and this is also where we add credit formation via credit score and borrowing. So here's the way to think about it. Afterburner is collateralized only with not just stable collateral, but stable collateral that's been stabilized using an identical fork of our core. And that is the only type of collateral that's allowed into Afterburner. So think of Afterburner as like a super controlled, like high level clean room, where before you can go in, you have to put on the suit, you have to go through decontamination airlock, and so does anything else that goes in. So Afterburner, once there's collateral in there, that collateral has passed through a core fork, which we validate the code has not been modified, and has gone through this 50% of DNFT holders have basically held it in their wallets for at least 30 days. And so this is now safe to go into Afterburner. Once it's in there, DNFT holders bring their collateral of this type, they prove collateral, they deposit it in the Afterburner vault. All of it is sort of mingled together in the Afterburner vault. And then on their metadata balance sheets, they get this balance, which we call DD, deposited DYAD, for each DYAD flavor they've brought in. So let's say Joey, bring in some ETH flavored DYAD, some Lido flavored DYAD, and I don't know, some Uni flavored DYAD. Okay, so these are my three flavors. I bring them in, and on my metadata balance sheet for each of those types that I brought in, I have another sort of subfield. And that subfield is just, what is my balance? What is my amount borrowed? Those are the two. So what does the borrowed mean? This is where we get to, I hesitate to call it uncollateralized lending because it's closed loop and you can't bring what you borrow out of Afterburner. but it is definitely credit formation, and it has a similar effect to credit formation in a typical commercial economy, where it greatly increases the margins of the products that economy can produce. So Asfi, cheers. Asfi's here. He's an angel investor and got me into reading Lombard Street, a classic of sort of the British money market of like the 1800s, specifically in London, specifically at sort of the moment of the sort of considered, I guess, the modernization in terms of a central bank starting to act like what we consider a central bank doing. But I read this book when I was in my like early 20s, and I kind of forgot all of it. But Osfi encouraged me to pick it up again. So it was very relevant and influential. I recommend people check that out. But anyway, this credit formation happens like this. So as I mentioned, when you deposit your DYAD flavors, you get increments on your balance sheet for each flavor you deposit. You've deposited this much. You can then, as a DNFT holder, essentially lever up on any of those collateral types that you've brought in. So let's say I want to lever up on my Lido, my STETH. I then go to the protocol and I say, okay, and this can just be in the UI, it could be a lever slider, it could be an amount that I input, whatever it is. I say, okay, I want to 3x my Lido. The protocol then does a check on my credit score, which is another metadata trait that Afterburner adds. And then this is where credit is created. This is the moment of true credit creation. It just increments my deposited DYAD balance for that collateral type with nothing else happening. So no additional collateral is deposited in the Afterburner vault. It is simply increased my amount. And again, it's not an ERC20 at this point. The ERC20s are locked in the vault in Afterburner. This is just my balance sheet balance of this token that I have, the representation of my balance sheet, the deposited version. So now I have 3x the deposited DYAD Lido that I had before. That also increments the borrowed quantity on my metadata balance sheet. So the protocol knows what my total balance is, but if it subtracts the borrowed amount from that for that collateral type, it will know what I really brought into the protocol, what I have as collateral versus what I borrowed. So the protocol just creates that from thin air, right? It is created credit at that point. What can I just then withdraw it and sort of like run off with that? Not exactly. And this is where XP comes in. So XP is exactly what it sounds like, experience points. It is the sort of ladder or leaderboard that exists among the DNFTs within Afterburner. So XP basically determines the bandwidth. So here's how withdrawal, or here's how minting works from Afterburner. Any DNFT holder can burn any of their deposited DYAD balances, their collateral types, they burn one of them in order to mint one DYAD plus. And that DYAD plus is the token that most of DeFi and the rest of the world will know as the DYAD token. So DYAD plus is minted by any DNFT holder by burning any one of their deposited DYAD collateral types. And again, you can lever up and then burn those deposited DYADs that you've borrowed to make real DYAD plus, which is an ERC20 that you can use as a stable asset throughout DeFi. But there's a protocol-wide withdrawal limit or minting limit that's just 1-to-1 with the amount of actual stable collateral that is in Afterburner's collateral vault. And remember, those are just the flavors that DNFT holders have brought over from the core protocol and its forks. So you can never create more, and this is all stabilized already. So every DYAD plus is equal in value to every one of those core collateral types that are from the core protocol and its forks. Afterburner, it never allows more DYAD plus to exist than the total amount of that collateral that's in its collateral vault. But it's 1-to-1. What that means for DNFTs, though, think about this: if there's an amount of credit in the system overall, so if you look across all the DNFT balance sheets, all collateral types, you can determine pretty easily what is the amount of credit in this system in Afterburner versus actual collateral. That creates a bottleneck the minting, at the mouth of Afterburner, basically, where it's minted, because you have more potential deposited DYAD balances across all the DNFTs, because people have borrowed stuff and levered up, then there is room to mint DYAD Plus. You can't turn all of them into DYAD Plus because, again, the amount of DYAD Plus must never exceed, and is not allowed to exceed, the amount of DYAD flavors total in the Afterburner collateral vault. So this creates a competition among DNFT holders. How much of that one-to-one withdrawal bandwidth are they allowed to occupy? And that is what XP is. XP determines, as a DNFT holder, your percentage of total XP equals your percentage of that one-to-one withdrawal bandwidth that's allowed. Now, if you've levered all the way up and only, 10% of your total deposited DYAD balance is actually collateral that you brought in, and you have really high XP, well, brother, you can mint these DYAD pluses for like 10 cents, depending on how well you play it. And you can do that at size. That is how the market gets to purchase very, very high efficiency, high margin tokens that are collateralized still, not just one-to-one, because remember, all of the flavors are over collateralized to one degree or another. Those DYAD pluses, which a DNFT holder just minted for 10 cents, are able to be redeemed through, and I can get into the redemption details, but because the collateral is non-custodial, redemption basically just means you have less liability on that, so you can withdraw more of your collateral safely. But you can always withdraw your collateral anyway. But you basically, as a holder, on the holder side, so somebody who does not own a DNFT and goes to our pool and swaps some of your ETH for some DYAD Plus, you as a holder, you can redeem that for 2 or 3x its value in underlying collateral if you want to take it that far. Normally, you won't have to, because the pool basically at the top of Afterburner is sort of the buffer, the redemption buffer. But normally, you could do that if you wanted to. That is basically how. That's why through both credit formation, as I described, like the protocol being able to just increment balances of DNFTs who want it based on their, and then credit scores just based on, are you able to basically pay this back with interest, and then the rates on the different collateral types. Well, that's based on swapping between them. So let me get into that for a second. Okay, so how do you do rates discovery, and what are like the demand drivers on using one type of collateral versus another type of collateral if they're all just in a stabilized form? Why do you really care? So, like I said earlier, when a DNFT holder wants to mint DYAD Plus, they have to choose which deposited DYAD flavor they want to burn. They can't burn, I guess if they're making a lot of DYAD Plus, they can mint a combination of flavors. They could burn a combination of flavors, but each DYAD Plus, which is itself a blend of all the different collateral types, has to be minted by burning one collateral type. So every time you burn a collateral type as a DNFT holder, your DNFT records in its metadata how many of this collateral type you have burned. So what that does is that determines what your redemption rights are. So the more of a certain type you burn, let's say that you burn a ton of, some random shitcoin that you think is really easy to create a fork around, and it's just easier to do, and you can kind of get one over. Well, your DNFT will have a very deep patina of having burnt a lot of this token that's not super desirable. Not the token, but the stabilized representation of it. Then secondary market does its magic and says, okay, if I buy this DNFT, when I redeem stuff, I'm going to have the right to get back like a lot of Joey shitcoin liquidity. I'd rather have a DNFT that has like a deep return on like ETH or Lido, right? That then incentivizes those flavors, DNFTs, to burn desirable flavors to mint DYAD Plus, which creates demand, a pull from Afterburner on those cores. So in other words, quality tends to rise to the surface because that is what secondary pays for. Secondary wants redemption rights in the highest quality, most desirable collateral types. And that really, marginalizes shitcoins as a collateral type. Still allows them in if there's some compelling reason to, but a DNFT holder who's ultimately incentivized that, like, while they hold this DNFT, they want to see an appreciation in secondary market value versus just the, general rising floor price. They're going to choose carefully which types of deposited DYAD, which flavors they burn, because every burn is recorded and plays a role in secondary market valuation of this DNFT. The other sink, so that's basically minting DYAD Plus is a major sink for this deposited DYAD, and then has that effect on the DNFTs. The other main sink is XP. So to get XP, which again determines your withdrawal bandwidth, you burn these deposited DYAD types, and that's another sink and another way of expressing demand to the cores from Afterburner. So I just dropped a lot. Please, I'm gonna pause. Ask questions on that stuff because there is a lot there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I get it. After you go through it, why this incentivizes behavior, obviously, because in order to get the most out of this position, right, you want to build up your XP, lever up in order to, to make because you can make a ton of money, right, just by minting at a cheap price and then putting it out on the market for everybody else. I have a question there with the gamification. So this is an opportunity as well for people to kind of snipe those underperforming or, over, I guess, the NFTs that are about to get liquidated, and then, turn those around, right, and then sell those for a major premium, right? Earn money on them and sell them for a major premium.
Absolutely. And actually, the lower your XP rank, like the less amount of XP your DNFT has versus the other ones, the more XP you get for every deposited DYAD flavor you burn. So as you get up in the ranks, you have to burn a lot more deposited DYAD to continue to stay competitive. What this does is exactly what you just said. It creates this trade where you could basically buy the floor DNFTs, burn some deposited DYAD. It should be good, so that again your patina or your history of burning entitles whoever buys this from you to good collateral types when they redeem. But you could just accrue XP super cheap down at the bottom, get your DNFT depending on how much powder you have to devote to this trade, get your DNFT up the leaderboard to a point where you then sell it back on secondary for a profit. And in almost all cases, the profit on like a certain rank of XP should be greater, or secondary should pay more for that than it costs in burned deposited DYAD, basically, especially if you have a reasonable credit score and you can lever up on a lot of that burn. That should be a profitable trade. Now this is also, so you can look at Afterburner and think and see like, okay, what is the inflation, or inflation is the wrong way to say it. It is inflationary, but like, what is the level of credit versus collateral of ST ETH versus ETH versus Uni versus whatever types of collateral are in Afterburner at that point? That will also drive sort of the rates discovery process and the desirability discovery, the demand discovery process ultimately. The one thing I forgot to mention that makes that work is DNFTs can trade and swap this deposited DYAD balance directly between each other. And that's not a token transaction. That's almost like a near zero gas metadata based operation. What this allows is basically, imagine Curve, but the invariant is even flatter, because Curve has to still deal with different stabilization mechanisms, different collateral types. All the requirement is that it's pegged in some way. Afterburner only admits collateral that is created with a very specific fork of a very specific protocol. That allows us essentially to have a flatter invariant for these swaps that are totally metadata based, again, for this closed loop stable swap basically between flavors. So it creates a tremendous amount of opportunity for expressivity between DNFT holders of their views on basically the underlying collateral types of the forks, which ultimately benefits DYAD Plus because there's a constant kind of process, battle, whatever you want to call it, of what should that token's collateral mix, what should that basket look like? And that's what happens in Afterburner.
Okay, and very cool. So if you swap that metadata, right? If you send it from one DFT to another position, does it swap that that XP as well into the new one?
No. That's actually
Okay.
really important. XP works, and these sort of like metadata-based incentives and leaderboards work because it cannot be swapped. In order to cash out your XP, you have to sell the whole DNFT. And that allows XP to be inflationary. If XP were a token, or even like a metadata bounds thing that could be traded the same way that like your deposited DYAD flavors can be traded, the whole system would kind of break down, because then XP would almost like per XP, there'd start to be price discovery there, and you don't want that because per XP is always going to be super inflationary. So we want the secondary market to be thinking in terms of XP rank versus XP absolute amount, which is essentially meaningless.
Okay, all right, that makes sense, because that's kind of what I was wondering is the price discovery portion of XP, if because I know that's not what you want, right? And that's the first thing that went through my head,
right?
Was kind of
so
transitioning that.
So in terms of secondary market price discovery, the job of secondary market is to digest increasingly more information dense stacks of DNFT metadata, like throughout the ecosystem. If you think of every protocol sort of like a horizontal layer of the ecosystem, DNFTs are like the pillars that connect all those layers. And every layer a DNFT engages with is going to add a new field of metadata. So secondary does a really important job of deciding and tearing apart what is valuable, what is not, which protocols in the ecosystem are adding value, which ones are not, what is a good combination of like credit score and afterburner combined with, I don't know, some like trading fee upside in like another composing protocol. Because DNFTs without like infinite dry powder, they're going to have to specialize. So there's a strategy to accruing rank in specific composing protocols that comes out. What's really cool, though, is with every new composing protocol that's introduced, the market for DNFTs, the secondary market, becomes inefficient again. And traders love inefficient markets, especially traders who like to understand fundamentals and understand information. The secondary market for DNFTs, until the ecosystem is like super mature, and I'm talking like a long time from now, as long as new protocols are being introduced that have some impact on the ecosystem, secondary will need to price that, and it will introduce inefficiency back into that market, which again incentivizes traders who are really educated. It incentivizes traders who understand and can go under the hood and kind of understand, will this be valuable, will it not be valuable, this new protocol. And the more information you can bring to that market, the better you will do. Because it is, again, between DNFT holders and those who want to be DNFT holders. The benefit of that is protocol builders ultimately have to serve those demands. And those demands are good because knowledge still has an edge in inefficient markets. And so it creates this nice, again, I really hate the term flywheel because it's inaccurate. Mechanical engineering, flywheel is an inductor. It's not like a magic money machine. But this flywheel of like secondary pricing new protocols based on will DNFT holders who need to use the protocols and benefit from them care about this, speculating on will DNFT holders care about this, and trying to bring as much information about the workings of the ecosystem into that secondary market, that will then incentivize protocol builders to create protocols that will benefit from that, right? So that's sort of like the incentive glue that ties together the whole ecosystem.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Very cool. Makes a lot of sense. All right. Awesome. Okay. So I think we got a good, thorough understanding. I'll probably go back and listen to this again.
I think I'm going to try to feed to like ChatGPT and see if it can spit out some better docs or something. I'll just feed this whole audio into it.
Yeah, I've been trying to do that with YouTube, and it's not picking up on the YouTube video. So I think I got to download the audio file and try it that way. But ChatGPT is definitely a great way to simplify some things. But yeah, okay, so very cool. All right, so then let's kind of transition a little bit towards the changes you've made for the upcoming V6, right? Because we talked previously before your first test nets, and you guys have made upgrades along the way, and then obviously major changes based off some regulatory stuff and differences. And I want to talk a little bit about that after this. But what are the major upgrades that that you guys have put into V6?
Yeah, so actually V6 was our last test net, and the learnings from that combined with all the regulatory stuff that was happening around the same time were the impetus for a lot of these changes. So again, the biggest change, like we were working with Chainlink and Teller. Teller is an awesome team, by the way. They were actually really helpful as oracles, because we thought we needed oracles in order to make any of this work. Moving away from oracles and being totally endogenous price discovery based on that kind of optimistic minting and withdrawal mechanism with the challenge window and this whole liquidation incentive. That was for a number of reasons. We were trying to get to endogenous price discovery for a long time. That was like a big goal. It seemed like a really heavy lift, and one that if we got wrong, I mean, if you get that wrong, the results are catastrophic, right? Like someone could easily exploit the protocol. So we were kind of working that in the background, but then we saw, like, if Link is turned into a security, right? Like, really, God forbid I say that as a spiritual individual. Link is turned into a security, right? Suddenly Chainlink doesn't exist. I don't want DYAD, which is designed to be completely anti-fragile, robust, all these nice buzzwords that I actually believe in. I don't want DYAD to be affected by just lawmakers and policy people, right? That would expose us to that. I know that's kind of far-fetched, and you say it's alarmist, whatever, but as far-fetched as it is, there's a possibility, and I want to, any way we can control the risk exposure that users of DYAD, especially holders of the token itself, have, we're absolutely going to focus on that. So yeah, that was really like a kick in the ass to make that endogenous price discovery work. We did it. It's testing out beautifully so far. That will be a major part of our V7 testnet to make sure it actually works. And then the other part of, like, how do you get away from all of the things that sort of are the definition of what is a stablecoin right now, right? So hard peg, eliminated that with our endogenous price discovery. Custody of collateral. You can withdraw your collateral at any point. There's no limits or anything. The limit is just how much withdrawn or how much minted DYAD or DYAD Plus do you hold on your balance sheet. That's just a risk assessment that you have to take. And ultimately winding down your withdrawn DYAD balance or your minted DYAD balance so that you can withdraw your collateral. That's the incentive for redemptions. So that that's basically how redemptions work. You just mark it by the DYAD and the flavor that you want to wind down, and that allows you to eliminate that from your balance sheet, and that allows you to withdraw your collateral safely. So yeah, non-custodial. And then just kind of really, really leaning into what was foundational to us, maybe for a slightly different reason. It was more philosophical when we were starting than practical. But the fact that it's governance free really, and we're working with an excellent legal team now who's really kind of staying and keeping us up to date on the latest developments here. But the zero governance or the governance free, the fact that it's very easy to show once we deploy this, there's no team that controls it anymore. We have no admin access. We have no ability to change code. All we are is another group of builders trying to, because we're holders of the NFTs, we're trying to make this ecosystem as good as possible with all the other builders. That true immutability and autonomy of the core protocol is like many times more valuable than it was when it was just like a philosophical position. So yeah, I'd say those are the three things based on findings from V6 testnet. And then the other side of it was like the UX side, right? Like V6, we still had this sort of combined core afterburner design that was earlier, where the gamification logic was mingled with the core like establishment of the precursor token as well as the DNFTs. And it was just kind of like it required this synchronization function. It was just, the UX was not what one should have for something that's supposed to be high frequency and gamified like this. And the other part of that is we're in pretty good momentum with both Optimism and Arbitrum, who want us to deploy there pretty much as soon as possible. And we're starting to think a lot about sort of this omni-chain stablecoin idea, and making our core protocol. There's nothing that was blocking that initially, but now, basically, with the endogenous price discovery, with the fact that we don't need to hook up oracles, just the fact that we're not composed on as much stuff makes those deployments and really makes getting into other EVM systems, right? Like Fuel is super shilling us on trying to go over there and make a version in Sway. And Solana VM is probably going through some tough times, but there are other VMs that are definitely worth attention. And this design makes that just a lot more simple. That we don't have to use oracles. We don't have to. There doesn't have to be a level of tooling already on those chains in order for us to deploy there. So that makes the omni-chain strategy a lot more solid, just a lot less friction. Lets us get onto chains earlier, right? Like Chainlink isn't always the first thing to go somewhere, and if we can only follow Chainlink to new chains, that's a major downside. So yeah, all of these things that I kind of talked about here, I mean, every part of the design in some ways modified from our last version that we tested with V6. And yeah, this fairly epic spaces is sort of like, those are all of the changes, more or less. Like the entire design is at this point now.
Yeah, very cool. And then I know you guys also made changes prior to V6 with the total amount of NFTs that we're able to mint. I know you guys did 500 early on, and I believe you did 2,000, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
V6. And then what's going to be the total amount that can be created going forward?
Yeah. So what's really cool, those relatively small numbers, the 500, 2,000, all that was a limitation of our older protocol design, where we had the sync function and it had to loop through every DNFT to update metadata, which is just, looking back, we had to do that to get to where we are now, but it's obvious that this is a better way. So now, technically, the number of DNFTs is totally unbound. Obviously, we don't want to have too many of these, or the mechanisms start to be less effective. So we're developing, and this is sort of in constant development. And there's a lot of development outside of the DYAD team in this area too. So we're staying up to date on what the latest mechanism designs for this are. But we're basically going to do a launch that allows the market essentially to determine what is the total number of DNFTs going to be capped at. And then all of our angels and investors are basically on a percentage system where whatever that quantity is, they can lock in at a percentage of that. So obviously there's no dilution through that process, but it does allow the market to determine what is the right size of this DNFT. And that's still fairly arbitrary, because as the protocol grows, as the market changes, that could have led to a different outcome. But basically, the real reason is not to arrive at like, what is the exact right number of DNFTs? They don't think that exists. It's more to ensure that there's not a big pool of unminted DNFTs in the worst case scenario that will prevent the secondary market from forming, which if the secondary market doesn't really form because there's this unminted stuff hanging around, then a lot of this mechanism just doesn't really kick into gear, or it takes a lot longer to. So the launch mechanism is mainly to make sure that there's no like excess inventory. But yeah, other than that, the number, like, technically is completely unlimited, which again, Shafu's not here, but really kudos to him and his team. That was a real achievement technically.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. Yeah, let the market fit kind of decide how many end up getting minted. But based off your interest in the testnet, I imagine it's going to go pretty well. So
yeah, that was the other thing that was sort of an incentive there. So last testnet, all of them minted out in like I think I can go back to the Ether channel. It was like 11 minutes, I think, which for a Goerli testnet is pretty beyond our expectations. So yeah, I think that just having the capacity to whatever the market brings to it, to be able to meet that and to not have it turn into either like a gas war on one end, or on the other end, a bunch of unminted DNFTs that are preventing any sort of secondary market action from starting.
Yeah, it's a good thing that you guys had the testnet before Goerli ETH started costing money too. So
that is the weirdest thing. I've been so heads down on DYAD stuff that I haven't really dug into that. But fundamentally, I need to understand, what is it about scarcity of the gas token that makes testnets. Well, why is that necessary for testnets, right? Because like that was a huge thing with our process. We would like do a testnet and shut it down, and then people on our Discord are getting pissed at us because like our Gorley ETH is like gone now, and we had to like work really hard and camp out on faucets. I think some people who did our testnet like paid for it, and that's just kind of like Tezos at that point, right? It's not even a testnet. So I don't totally get that. I know that they're working on the Sepulva one. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right, but yeah, that's such a weird thing I haven't totally wrapped my mind around.
Yeah, same. And I just watched it like after I got sent the announcement about it, and the price was just going ballistic. And I was, now it's down obviously to more reasonable, price per se. But as it was skyrocketing, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to make it impossible for smaller projects to run a testnet on ETH, because it's just going to cost so much money. But even then, 22 cents per is still a lot of money when you're tacking on to regular ETH fees. So
yeah, and it's not even the project affording it. It's like now your users are going to start acting like it's not a testnet, right? And it gets into this bad gray area where it's like you're going to hesitate to deploy code that if it were actually like fake money, you could test out. The whole point of a testnet. Now it's like you could actually lose people money, which is totally changes the thinking from a builder side around like what can you actually deploy and ask people to use. Because our earlier version ones, even V6, there's no way I would deploy that in Gorley now, because there would really be, financial. I mean, I hope people would be responsible with it, but knowing like a bunch of the wonderful degens in our space, they probably wouldn't. So I feel like it already changes sort of what is testnet, what is the point of testnetting. But yeah, hopefully another like real testnet will be out before too long, or else we're just going to be using like localhost. Everybody who tests it will have to like go to our GitHub and like download and use npm to like deploy it on their computer, which would just be a disaster. So yeah, hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah, agreed. All right, so cool. Let's just a couple quick things on the roadmap here. First, what is going to be what's your guys' anticipated mint cost at launch?
Yeah, so we're also probably going to leave that up to market forces. Now that our collateral is completely non-custodial, it's a little bit less of a risk. Like you used to, in the older design, a DNFT could kind of like semi-rug other users by quickly with like taking out all their collateral. It could like force other withdrawn DYAD like onto the balance sheets of other DNFTs, which is a total mess that we knew we can't socialize, stuff like that. So this design completely does away with that. So there's a little bit less risk aspect to certain DNFTs having lower balances than others. So yeah, we might do it that way. There would still need to be a minimum, because we don't, obviously having a minimum mint cost is a nice Sybil defense. It puts a little friction around like just all the ways that things are botted and done that way. The other thing about it is like our investors and our angels, they underwrote a tremendous amount of risk. Like now we're just starting our seed raise after our pre-seed. The risk is a lot less because we have a team. It's still risky, but the early dudes like Lim Zero over here, Playa, is one of the very first actually. Like took a huge leap of faith on us. Forever grateful for that. Obviously, we need to deliver a tremendous amount of value back to them. So that's luckily a somewhat separate discussion now from like what is the mint cost, because those were really coupled, and it makes sense, but you have to really think about that stuff. So now that the system is a little bit different, there's less risk around collateral, and multiple collateral types can be brought in. The ecosystem is more fleshed out. There's just more design space there. So that's really good, because we deliver more value to our earliest investors, and at the same time make it, hopefully a more accessible, much more fair and transparent launch process. So yeah, but basically to give you a full sense, so 70% total of all DNFTs, just in terms of like what the percentages are of team, ecosystem allocation, which is like we're holding back a percentage, and then investor DNFTs, 70% at whatever total number there will be claimed on launch day by basically retail or whoever decides to mint.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. And then what's your kind of launch window?
Yeah,
that you're
so this
aiming
is
for?
yeah, the regulatory thing is definitely influential there. So I think that before a protocol like DYAD, there wasn't really a sense of like market timing exactly because it's not really as tied to price action as it is to volatility. But now, I think that we were at V6, like, 45 days away from mainnet if we want to just continue with that design. We had done audits, they revealed stuff, they were going well. Now we sort of are waiting because we want to understand, like, we want to see some outcomes just to better understand the environment in an actual, like, non-theoretical way, just to be able to have the greatest strategic advantage possible with our launch. That allows us to spend time developing kind of what I described on this entire spaces, really going back and saying, okay, how can we optimize this even more given the changing environment outside, and sort of given that, but also given like how do we better build on and implement our first principles that we started this whole project on. So I would say now there's really, in the core protocol especially, I feel like it is fully optimized. Like the fact that we got away from oracles, that was sort of like the final thing for me. I was like, okay, endogenous price discovery, unlimited collateral types. This is good. So right now where we are, we're getting those. We're finishing building out the logic. Actually, our auditor who did our first audit, Zach Obrant, who anyone looking to audit a smart contract, Zach is basically the best I've ever worked with. Super sharp guy. We basically have him on as a consultant now for the next 2 weeks, kind of keeping him up to date on changes so that when he does our next audit on core before we do Sherlock and Code Arena, he's really up to speed on what's happening. It can just be a faster, more successful audit. So yeah, that's pretty much for core. We are in active development. If all those audits go well, we will be mainnet ready in 30 to 45 days. But do we deploy? Do we launch then? That really depends on kind of non-builder, non-audit type concerns.
Yeah, makes sense. I'll be interested. I'll be paying attention. And then hopefully by then I've flipped some of these things that I can comfortably buy one.
Yes.
Some things looking promising, so we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, the momentum, I'd say, and sort of the interest in what we're doing since the Luna filing and the BUSD stuff, and sort of this overall, I wouldn't say it's been like a massive flight of liquidity. I mean, I look on chain, I look at DeFi Llama, and I look at the actual chain, and there's not like a massive flight in liquidity other than BUSD. Like the USDC flight is negligible. That said, I think that there is a new level of risk exposure to these stablecoins that comprise, again, like 95% of stablecoin liquidity. So there's been a lot of interest in what we're doing finally. A lot of the stuff that was very philosophical when we started, now, even if it's not immediately existentially relevant, there's a practicality to it that was not really there when we were starting out.
Yeah, cool to see it progress. Kind of the changes, especially from the first time we talked, to kind of what your guys' thinking has been, and how this thing has gone. Very exciting stuff coming for you guys. So, but hey, that wraps up my questions. And any, kind of the stuff that I wanted to talk about here. I mean, you're very good. Interviewing you is super easy. You're very good at just kind of telling the whole story and painting the whole picture. So it's nice to get you on here, and because you get all the nitty gritty details before I have to ask the questions. So, but with that, is there anything for your last message you want to put out to those listening? And then obviously this is recorded, and we'll get it thrown up on YouTube pretty quickly.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. I just want to thank you and DeFi Raiders for hosting this AMA. This is really good because the core team has been fairly quiet since V6. Like, spent a lot more time with legal, spent a lot of time on these audits building. So this is a nice sort of summary. I mean, to be fair, it's like an hour and a half summary. So I think, ChatGPT, if it could do or Notion now actually has like a nice little AI plugin where you can like shrink things, change the tone to casual, whatever. This is actually really useful, and I'm going to post this recording all over our Discord and Twitter, because a lot of people have been asking. It's sort of been fragmented bits of information. What is the actual design vision? How does the whole thing come together? So this is great. You let me go, and it's good. I mean, this is a culmination of almost like a month of work at this point.
Yeah, I mean, hey, people come here to listen to you, not me, so it's too easy to let you go.
Cool. Well, man, thank you again. Thank you for having me. Yeah, last thing I'd say, Matthew Fisher just joined. We haven't actually met in person yet, but Matthew through Buttonwood DeFi is hosting a talk tomorrow at ETH Denver, 5:30 Denver time. That's basically me, Publius, who's the founder of Beanstalk, multi-person pseudonymous, as well as hold on, the phone just went up. Sorry, as well as Manny, who I met at the last SF stablecoin meetup that we did at Golden Gate Park Boathouse. Super, super, super smart dude. One of the authors of the Ampleforth paper, economic historian, which brings a really interesting approach to it. And then the founder of Buttonwood, which is like a DeFi. If you guys haven't checked them out, you should absolutely look. They're like Matthew, you'd probably describe it the best, but I'd say it's like a DeFi primitive, studio, where it's like you create DeFi primitives without like a specific product, but then you make products from these DeFi primitives. So like they have a really interesting stablecoin design that uses two of their primitives, and you should absolutely check that out. So I'm very excited to join those folks on stage tomorrow. I don't know if it's going to be live streamed, but it'll definitely be recorded. If anyone's at ETH Denver and you want a ticket, because I think it's sold out on the Eventbrite page, either ask me, but then I'm just going to ask Matthew. So Matthew's here. Matthew, I'm just going to tell people to DM you. So yeah, it's not that many people here right now, but anyone who's going to be in Denver, just let either of us know. We'd love to see you at the event.
Yeah, very cool. And Matthew, since you're here listening, you don't know who I am, but I will definitely be DMing you to see if we can get, because I found Bubble DeFi just a little while ago, and I don't remember which group I found it out of. I think it was actually Artemis, who has hosted Joey before. So I want to reach out to you and see if I can get you on here to chat. But with that, hey, Joey, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much. Always a pleasure talking to you, and really looking forward to your launch.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the platform, and I look forward to having all of you guys on the devolatilized bearer asset journey with us. Yeah, let's call it DBAs. All right, peace, everybody. Thank you.
All right, take care.